The rain hammered against the reinforced glass of St. Jude's Trauma Center like 1,000 tiny bullets. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered, casting a sickly pale glow over the sterile corridors. Stella stood at the nursing station, her fingers trembling as she tried to cap a syringe. The plastic rattled against the glass vial. It was a rhythmic, pathetic sound. Dr. Eris, the lead trauma surgeon with a god complex that filled the room, let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "Look at her, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. Tell me again why we let a liability like you work the night shift, Stella. One wrong move and you've punctured an artery." Stella didn't look up. She didn't defend herself. She simply focused on the tremor in her hands. It wasn't fear, it was a neurological echo. The ghost of 1,000 adrenaline spikes from the life she had buried under a pile of medical certifications. To Eris, she was a broken bird. To the rest of the staff, she was Silent Stella, the nurse who was too slow to speak and too shaky to trust. "I'm sorry, doctor," she murmured, her voice a low sandpaper rasp. "Sorry doesn't fix a code black," Eris snapped, snatching the syringe from her. "Go clean up the spill in Bay 4. Try not to trip over your own feet." As Stella turned away, she adjusted the high collar of her scrubs, hiding the thin, jagged scar that ran from her collarbone to the base of her skull. Her ears pricked. Above the hum of the HVAC system and the distant sirens, she heard it. 3 black SUVs pulling into the ambulance bay. No sirens, no lights, just the heavy, synchronized thud of armored doors closing in unison. The automatic doors hissed open. A phalanx of men in charcoal suits entered, surrounding a tall, silver-haired man, Senator Elias Thorne. But Stella's eyes didn't go to the politician. They locked onto the lead bodyguard walking a half step behind him. The man had a distinctive gait, weight distributed on the balls of his feet, eyes scanning the ceiling corners, not the crowd. He carried a medical bag marked with a specialized seal. As the group swept past the desk, the bodyguard's sleeve shifted, revealing a glimpse of a tattoo on his inner wrist, a black sun with a broken radius. Stella's heart didn't race. It slowed. Her breathing became rhythmic, deep, and silent. She knew that mark. It wasn't a Secret Service insignia. It was the mark of a cleaner, a high-level wet work operative. The senator wasn't being protected. He was being delivered. The hospital transformed instantly. The Secret Service detail took over the VIP wing, but they were being directed by the man with the black sun tattoo. He introduced himself as Agent Vane. Dr. Eris was practically tripping over his own feet to impress them. "The senator is complaining of chest pains and dizziness," Eris blurted out, chest puffed. "I'll personally oversee the EKG." Stella moved through the shadows of the hallway, pushing a cart of soiled linens. She was invisible. People looked through her, not at her. She watched Vane. He wasn't looking at the heart monitors. He was looking at the oxygen intake valves on the wall. He was checking the lines of sight to the security cameras. He was a predator, mapping his kill zone. "Nurse, Stella," Eris barked, snapping his fingers. "Stop daydreaming and get the senator's vitals. And for God's sake, keep your hands steady. If you embarrass this hospital in front of Thorne, you're fired before the sun comes up." Stella approached the senator's bed. Thorne looked pale, his eyes darting around the room with a hidden terror. He wasn't sick. He was hunted. As Stella reached out to wrap the blood pressure cuff around his arm, her hand shook violently. Eris groaned in the background, rolling his eyes. But as Stella's hand brushed Thorne's wrist, she didn't just feel a pulse. She felt the microtransmitter taped to his skin. She leaned in, pretending to check his pupils. Her voice was a mere vibration, barely audible. "Don't drink the water they give you. Don't close your eyes." Thorne's eyes widened. For a split second, he saw past the shaky nurse persona. He saw the cold, tactical precision in her gaze. But before he could speak, Vane stepped forward, his hand resting heavily on Stella's shoulder. His grip was a warning, a crush-depth pressure intended to intimidate. "Is there a problem, nurse?" Vane asked, his voice like grinding stones. Stella let her hand shake even harder, dropping the cuff. I'm sorry. The senator's blood pressure is very high," she stuttered, playing the role of the panicked amateur perfectly. Vane sneered, pushing her aside. "Get out. We'll handle the monitoring from here." Stella stumbled back, catching a glimpse of Vane's medical bag. It wasn't a defibrillator inside. It was a portable signal jammer. The hospital was about to go dark. 10 minutes later, the first chime of the disaster sounded. Not a scream, but a silence. The Wi-Fi dropped. The internal pagers went dead. Then the power flickered. The emergency generators kicked in, bathing the hallways in an eerie red emergency glow. "Just a surge from the storm," Eris shouted to his panicked staff. "Back to work." Stella wasn't listening. She was in the utility closet, stripping off her oversized scrubs. Underneath, she wore a black compression shirt. She reached into the false bottom of her locker and pulled out a small encrypted comms unit and a heavy-duty tactical folding knife. Her hands were perfectly still now. The tremor was gone. It only appeared when she was forcing her body to remain idle. In motion, she was a machine. She moved through the ventilation ducts, a path she had mapped out during her first week of retirement. She emerged in the ceiling space above the VIP suite. Below, she saw Vane. He was no longer playing the bodyguard. He had a suppressed pistol drawn, and he was calmly threading a needle into a line of IV tubing. "The senator's heart will stop in 3 minutes," Vane said to a radio. "It will look like a standard myocardial infarction brought on by stress. The local doctor is an idiot. He'll sign the death certificate without a second thought." Stella didn't wait. She knew the layout of the oxygen lines. She reached over and manually turned the bypass valve, flooding the room's vent with a concentrated burst of pure oxygen, while simultaneously triggering the fire suppression system's manual override in that specific zone. A high-pitched hiss filled the VIP suite. The fire damper slammed shut, locking Vane inside. Stella dropped through the ceiling tile behind him, landing with the silence of a shadow. Vane spun around, firing a shot, the suppressed thwip buried around in the wall. Stella didn't use a gun. She grabbed a heavy, lead-lined apron used for x-rays and swung it with a centrifugal force that caught Vane in the ribs, sending him crashing into the medical monitors. The senator scrambled to the corner of the bed, gasping. Vane coughed blood, looking up at the shaky nurse who had just cracked his ribs. "Who the hell are you?" he wheezed. Stella didn't answer. She grabbed a roll of heavy-duty medical tape and a pair of trauma shears. "The liability," she said coldly. Vane wasn't alone. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway. The Secret Service detail were all part of the hit team. Stella grabbed the senator by the arm. "If you want to live, you move now." "I can't. My chest," Thorne gasped. "It's the jammer," Stella realized. She looked at his chest. The microtransmitter wasn't just a tracker. It was an induction coil. They were using the jammer's frequency to interfere with his pacemaker. She grabbed a nearby defibrillator. "What are you doing?" Thorne yelled. "Giving you a fighting chance." She didn't use the pads. She ripped the internal wiring out, creating a localized EMP pulse. She slammed the wires against the metal bed frame. Crack! A blue spark jumped. The jammer hissed and died. Thorne's breathing stabilized instantly. The door to the suite began to buckle. The hit team was using a hydraulic ram. Stella knew they couldn't go out the front. She kicked the window. It was reinforced, double-pane glass. She didn't waste time hitting it. She grabbed a pressurized CO2 tank from the corner, cracked the valve, and sprayed the corner of the glass. The extreme cold made the molecules brittle. She then slammed the base of the tank against the frozen spot. The entire window shattered into a million diamonds. "Jump," she commanded. "We're on the 3rd floor." "There's an industrial laundry chute 3 feet to the left on the exterior ledge. Jump or die." She shoved the senator out just as the door exploded inward. Stella didn't follow him immediately. She stood her ground as 3 men in tactical gear stormed in. The lead man raised a carbine. Stella grabbed a heavy IV pole, sliding it across the floor like a staff. It caught the lead man's ankles, tripping him. As he fell, she slammed a heavy tray of surgical instruments into the second man's face. She wasn't killing them, yet. She was incapacitating. She dived out the window, her fingers catching the cold metal rim of the laundry chute. She slid down the dark tunnel, the scent of bleach and stale linen filling her nose, as bullets sparked against the metal above her. They landed in the basement laundry room, buried in a mountain of white sheets. Thorne was shaking, his dignity gone. Stella was already at the door, peering through the small reinforced window. The basement was a labyrinth of steam pipes and electrical transformers. "They'll be at the bottom of the chute in 60 seconds, Stella said, checking her knife. "We need to get to the morgue. It has the only secure exit to the underground parking garage that isn't monitored by the main security hub." "How do you know all this?" Thorne whispered, clutching his chest. "You're just a nurse. I saw your hands. They were shaking." Stella looked at her hands. They were perfectly still. "I was an operative for the ISA, Black Tier. They told the world I died in a crash in Prague. I just wanted a quiet life, Senator. You're ruining my retirement." Suddenly, the overhead speakers crackled to life. It wasn't the operator. It was a voice Stella recognized, the Chief of Hospital Administration, Marcus Sterling. "Attention staff, we have a disgruntled employee, Stella Vance, who has kidnapped Senator Thorne. She is armed and extremely dangerous. Security is authorized to use lethal force." Stella cursed under her breath. The conspiracy went all the way to the top. The hospital wasn't just a setting for the hit, it was the accomplice. They were framing her to cover the senator's medical accident. She heard the service elevator groan. They were coming down. Stella grabbed a bottle of high-concentration floor stripper and a bag of powdered caustic soda from the cleaning supplies. She rigged a simple tripwire across the door using a roll of surgical silk. "When that door opens, don't breathe," she warned Thorne. The elevator doors slid open. 2 shooters stepped out. The tripwire pulled, tipping the chemicals into a bucket of water. A cloud of toxic, stinging vapor erupted. The shooters fell back, clutching their burning eyes. Stella moved in like a ghost. 2 precise strikes to the throat, and they were down. She stripped one of their radios. "Team 2, we have eyes on the target in the boiler room," a voice crackled in the radio. Stella realized the trap. They were being funneled. The cleaners weren't just chasing them, they were herding them toward the morgue, because in the morgue there were no witnesses. And there was a furnace. The morgue was cold, the air smelling of formaldehyde and ozone. Steel drawers lined the walls like filing cabinets for the forgotten. Stella pushed Thorne behind a heavy autopsy table. "Stay low," she commanded. She looked at the security camera in the corner. It was moving, tracking her. "I know you're watching, Sterling," she said to the empty room. "You sold out a U.S. senator for what? A seat on a pharmaceutical board? A kickback on the new wing?" A voice boomed over the morgue's intercom. "It's bigger than that, Stella. Thorne was going to gut the federal healthcare subsidies. He's bad for business. You, however, you're a fascinating ghost. My clients paid a lot of money to ensure you stayed dead in Prague. It's a shame you popped up here." Stella scanned the room. She saw the liquid nitrogen tanks used for cryopreservation. She saw the heavy bone saws on the instrument tray. She didn't have a gun, but she was in a room full of things designed to take bodies apart. 3 men entered through the double doors. They weren't the Secret Service hacks from before. These were professionals, wearing night vision goggles and silenced submachine guns. They moved in a synchronized diamond formation. Stella grabbed a canister of surgical prep ether. She smashed it on the floor, the volatile liquid evaporating instantly. "Senator, cover your face with that wet cloth. Now." She kicked a rolling gurney toward the shooters. They fired, the bullets shredding the thin mattress. As they adjusted their aim, Stella threw a heavy metal specimen tray at the overhead lights. Pop. Darkness. The shooters switched to night vision. That's what she wanted. She grabbed a high-intensity surgical light, the kind used for deep cavity exploration, and slammed the on switch while aiming it directly at them. The NVDs amplified the light 1,000 times. The shooters screamed, blinded as their goggles burned their retinas. Stella moved. She didn't use a knife. She used her hands. Strike to the temple, sweep the leg, a palm heel strike to the chin. In 10 seconds, 3 elite mercenaries were twitching on the floor. One managed to crawl toward his gun. Stella stepped on his wrist. The boon snapped with a dry crunch. She picked up his radio. "Sterling, send the rest. I'm running out of floor space." "We have to go now," Thorne urged, his voice cracking. "The garage is just through those doors." "No," Stella said, her eyes narrowing. She looked at the hallway map. "The garage is a kill box. They'll have a sniper on the ramp. We're going up." "Up? That's suicide." "They expect us to run. We're going to the one place they can't afford a messy firefight, the oxygen storage hub." They took the service stairs, Stella practically carrying the senator. Her hands were starting to shake again. The adrenaline was reaching its limit. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, using the pain to focus. As they reached the 4th floor, the alarms began to blare. The sprinklers triggered, drenching them in cold water. "They're trying to flush us out," Stella whispered. They reached the oxygen hub, a room filled with massive pressurized tanks that fed the entire hospital's life support. If one of these tanks blew, half the building would vanish. It was the ultimate stalemate. Stella heard a slow, rhythmic clapping. Out of the shadows stepped Dr. Eris. But he wasn't holding a scalpel. He was holding a remote detonator. Behind him stood Vane, his ribs taped, looking murderous. "I have to hand it to you, Stella," Eris sneered. "I thought you were just a pathetic, broken nurse, but you're a high-value asset. Or you were. Now you're just the person who blew up a hospital in a fit of post-traumatic psychosis." "You won't trigger that, Eris," Stella said, her voice steady. "You're too much of a coward to die with us." "I don't have to be in the room," Eris laughed. "And Vane here, he's very good at escaping." Vane stepped forward, drawing a long, serrated blade. "I'm going to enjoy this. No lights to blind me this time." Stella looked at the senator. "Get behind the primary manifold. Do not move." She turned to Vane. She didn't look like a nurse anymore. She looked like a reaper. "You think you're a predator? You're just a scavenger. I've killed men who make you look like an intern." Vane lunged. He was fast, but Stella was more efficient. She used the environment. She swung around a vertical oxygen pipe, using the momentum to kick Vane in the solar plexus. He wheezed, but countered with a slash that caught Stella's scrub top, drawing a thin line of red across her ribs. She didn't flinch. She grabbed a heavy brass wrench from a maintenance shelf. Clang! The metal hit Vane's forearm, forcing him to drop the knife. He tackled her, slamming her back against a pressurized tank. The impact rattled her teeth. "Die, you ghost!" Vane hissed, his hands finding her throat. Stella's vision began to blur. She reached up, not for his face, but for the emergency release valve on the tank behind her head. She yanked the pin. A jet of high-pressure liquid oxygen screamed out. It didn't hit Vane, but the sudden drop in temperature turned the air to ice. Vane's hands froze, the moisture on his skin bonding to the metal of the tank. He screamed, trying to pull away, but he was stuck. Stella rolled away, gasping for air. She looked at Eris, who was staring in horror, his finger trembling over the detonator button. "Drop it, Doctor," Stella commanded. "I'll do it! I'll kill everyone!" Eris shrieked. Suddenly, the heavy steel doors to the hub were blown off their hinges, not by a hit team, but by a flashbang. Federal agents dropped the weapon. A team of Black Ops soldiers in full tactical gear swarmed the room. They didn't point their guns at Stella, they pointed them at Eris in vain. A man in a dark trench coat walked into the center of the chaos. He looked at the carnage, then at Stella. He snapped a sharp, crisp salute. "Commander Vance, we tracked the signal pulse you sent from the morgue. Permission to take over the scene?" The hospital staff who had been huddled in the hallway, nurses, orderlies, the security guards who had mocked her, stood frozen. They watched as the shaky nurse stood up, wiped the blood from her face, and nodded to the man. "Secure the senator, Colonel," Stella said, her voice dripping with an authority that made the room go silent. "And get Dr. Eris out of my sight. He's a disgrace to the uniform he doesn't even know I have." The aftermath was a blur of blue and red lights. The hospital was surrounded by blacked-out SUVs and military transport. Senator Thorne was being loaded into a secure ambulance, but he refused to leave until he spoke to her. Stella stood by the ambulance bay, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Her hands were shaking again, but this time, nobody laughed. They looked at her with a mixture of awe and terror. Thorne took her hand. "You saved my life, and you saved this country from a massive scandal. Who do I think?" "A ghost," Stella replied. "I was never here, Senator. If this goes to the press, the ISA will have to move me again. I like the city. I'd like to stay." The colonel nodded solemnly. "The records will show a heroic intervention by an anonymous security contractor. Your secret is safe with me." As the ambulance pulled away, the colonel approached Stella. "The cleaner organization, the Black Sun, they aren't going to let this go, Stella. You killed 4 of their top men. You humiliated their client." "I know," Stella said, staring into the rain. "We can bring you back in," the colonel offered. "Full reinstatement, protective detail. You don't have to be a nurse anymore." Stella looked at her trembling hands. She thought about the patients she had helped, the quiet moments of care she had provided between the nightmares of her past. "I'm a good nurse, Colonel, even with the shakes. I think I'll stay right where I am." The colonel sighed. "As you wish. But we found something in Sterling's office. He wasn't the one who hired the Black Sun. He was just the middleman." Stella's eyes sharpened. "Who was it?" The colonel handed her a tablet. It showed a series of encrypted transfers from a blind trust. The source of the funds wasn't a corporation or a rival politician. It was a domestic intelligence agency. Stella felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "My own people?" "Not all of them," the colonel whispered. "A rogue faction. They think you know where the Prague files are hidden. This wasn't just about the senator. It was a test. They wanted to see if the ghost was still haunting the halls." The sun began to rise over the city, the gray light reflecting off the wet pavement. The hospital was returning to a semblance of order, though the scars of the night remained. Stella sat in the break room, a cup of lukewarm coffee between her hands. The door opened. It was a young nurse, Sarah, who had once called Stella a twitchy liability behind her back. Sarah looked at Stella, her face pale. "Stella, we didn't know," Sarah stammered. Stella took a slow sip of her coffee. The tremor was back, the rhythmic rattling of the cup against the saucer. "Know what, Sarah? That the floors need mopping in Bay 4? Sarah blinked, confused. "But the soldiers, the senator, you fought those men." "I think the stress of the lockdown is getting to you," Stella said with a faint, enigmatic smile. "I spent the whole night hiding in the linen closet. I'm a coward, remember?" Sarah looked at the bandage on Stella's ribs, visible through the tear in her shirt. She looked at the cold, steady fire in Stella's eyes. She realized then that the shaky nurse was a mask that protected them as much as it protected her. Sarah nodded slowly and backed out of the room. Stella's phone buzzed on the table. It was an unknown number. She answered it. "You did well, Stella. But the senator was just a distraction. The real play has already begun. Stella looked out the window. Across the street, a black SUV sat idling. A man in the driver's seat raised a hand, his inner wrist showing a black sun tattoo. "I'm counting on it," Stella whispered. She crushed the disposable phone in her hand, the plastic snapping easily. Her hands stopped shaking. She stood up, straightened her badge, and walked back out into the hallway. The night shift was over, but the war had just begun. If this story gave you chills, subscribe for more Code Black cases. Comment "silent" if you want to see Stella's next mission. Who do you think is the mole in the ISA? Let us know below.